They told me I wasn't fresh enough to lead. 3 months later, I'm sitting across from the CEO of their biggest competitor, charging triple my old salary to teach them how not to self-destruct. Want to hear the whole story? Trust me, you won't want to miss this part. My name is Helen Parker, and I'm 48 years old. Not that my age should matter. But apparently, it does. For 26 years, I'd been the backbone of Everest Consulting Group's client relations department. I'd built relationships that weathered 3 recessions, helped the company navigate 2 major acquisitions, and personally saved more client contracts than I could count. But none of that mattered on that particular Friday afternoon in March. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. The LED lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to dance mockingly across the mahogany table. The air conditioning unit in the corner wheezed like an old smoker, occasionally dripping condensation onto the already stained carpet. It was 3 o'clock, the classic execution hour in corporate America. Lucas Doyle sat across from me, his perfectly styled hair catching the fluorescent light. At 35, he was the newly appointed director of brand strategy, a position that seemed to exist solely to justify his MBA from Wharton. He had that particular look of someone who'd learned all his management techniques from LinkedIn posts and TED Talks about disruptive innovation. "Helen," he began, his voice carrying that practiced tone of manufactured sympathy that HR departments teach in their weekend workshops. "We need to talk." Beside him, Tammy from Human Resources shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her eyes darted everywhere except toward mine, focusing instead on the stack of papers in front of her. I'd seen that stack before, the standardized termination package, complete with legal waivers and non-disclosure agreements. Her fingers drummed nervously against the table's surface. "As you know, Everest is undergoing a significant transformation," Lucas continued, consulting his notes like he was reading from a script. "We're pivoting toward a more dynamic, forward-thinking approach to client engagement. The market demands agility, innovation, and frankly, a fresh perspective that resonates with today's business leaders." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. 26 years of experience had taught me to read between the lines of corporate speak. Fresh perspective meant young, dynamic meant cheap, forward-thinking meant disposable. "We've made the difficult decision to restructure the client relations department," he went on. "While we deeply value your contributions over the years, we feel it's time for someone with a more contemporary approach to take the reins." The room fell silent except for the persistent drip of the air conditioning and the distant hum of office life continuing beyond these walls. I could hear keyboards clicking in cubicles, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. Life at Everest was moving forward, and I was about to be left behind. "I see," I said finally, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "And who will be taking over my responsibilities?" Lucas exchanged a glance with Tammy before answering. "We're bringing in Madison Torres. She's 28, just finished her MBA. And she has some really innovative ideas about leveraging social media for client engagement. She'll bring exactly the kind of energy we need." Madison Torres, I'd met her during the interview process, had even recommended her for a junior position. She was bright, enthusiastic, and completely unprepared for the complexities of managing relationships with clients who'd been in business longer than she'd been alive. But she was young, she was cheap, and she spoke fluent millennial. "The transition will be seamless," Lucas assured me. "Madison will be starting Monday, and we'd appreciate it if you could spend the next week training her on your accounts." The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to train my own replacement, to hand over relationships I'd spent years building to someone who thought customer service meant responding to complaints on Twitter within 4 hours. "Of course," I replied. Because what else could I say? Fighting would only make things messier. And I'd learned long ago that dignity was sometimes the only thing you could take with you when everything else was stripped away. Tammy finally looked up, pushing the paperwork across the table. "Your severance package is quite generous," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months' salary, extended health benefits, and a positive reference letter. I scanned the documents, The numbers were adequate. The legal language standard. They'd done their homework, made sure everything was airtight. No room for lawsuits, no grounds for discrimination claims. Just a clean, corporate amputation. We'll need you to sign these by end of business today, Lucas added. And of course, there's a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding company operations and client information. I signed everything without reading the fine print. Not because I trusted them, but because I knew it didn't matter. They thought they were buying my silence, but they were really just paying for my freedom. As I gathered my things, Lucas stood up and extended his hand. Helen, I want you to know this isn't personal. You're a valuable professional, and I'm sure you'll find something that's a better fit for your skill set. I shook his hand, noting how soft his palm was, how his grip lacked the calluses that came from years of real work. Thank you, Lucas. I'm sure I will. The walk back to my office felt like a funeral march. My colleagues looked up from their computers with expressions ranging from pity to relief that it wasn't them. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and I could already sense the subtle shift in dynamics. I was no longer a colleague, I was a cautionary tale. My office, my former office, looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. The family photos on my desk, the awards on the wall, the coffee mug that read, "World's Best Mom," that my son Ethan had given me for my birthday. It all felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I packed methodically, placing each item in the cardboard box that had materialized on my desk. 26 years reduced to a single box of personal effects. The irony wasn't lost on me that the box had Everest Consulting Group printed on the side. Even my departure was branded. As I reached for the last item, a small cactus plant that had survived countless office relocations. I noticed Madison Torres hovering in the doorway. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ms. Parker?" she said tentatively. "I just wanted to say that I'm really looking forward to learning from you next week. I know I have big shoes to fill." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw myself 30 years ago. Eager, ambitious, completely naive about the realities of corporate life. She had no idea that the same company that was celebrating her youth today would discard her just as easily when she reached my age. "You'll do fine, Madison," I said, forcing a smile. "Just remember that clients are people, not metrics. Take care of them, and they'll take care of you." She nodded earnestly, as if I'd shared some profound wisdom instead of stating the obvious. "Thank you. I really appreciate that." After she left, I sat alone in my empty office for a few minutes, looking out the window at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful. But all I could think about was how many more sunsets I'd watch from this window. How many more conversations I'd have with clients who trusted me. How many more problems I'd solve with experience that apparently no longer mattered. The security guard appeared in my doorway, another corporate ritual. "Ready, Ms. Parker?" I picked up my box and followed him to the elevator. The ride down felt endless, each floor marking another step away from the life I'd built. In the lobby, I handed over my keycard and badge, symbols of belonging that meant nothing now. The walk to my car was the longest of my life. Every step felt heavy, weighed down by uncertainty and the crushing realization that I was starting over at an age when most people were planning their retirement. The parking garage echoed with my footsteps, each sound a reminder of how alone I was in this moment. I set the box in my trunk and got behind the wheel. For a moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Then, without warning, the tears came. Not gentle, dignified tears, but ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the career I'd lost, for the relationships I'd never get to nurture, for the financial security that had evaporated in a single afternoon. I cried for the younger version of myself who'd believed that hard work and loyalty were enough. That if you did your job well, you'd be rewarded with stability and respect. But mostly, I cried for the future I'd imagined, the one where I'd retire gracefully at 65, surrounded by colleagues who valued my experience and clients who appreciated my dedication. That future was gone, replaced by a terrifying blank canvas that I had no idea how to fill. When the tears finally stopped, I called my son Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Mom. How was your day?" "I got laid off," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. There was a pause. "What?" "Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "I will be," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's just unexpected. Do you want me to come over? I can cancel my evening plans." "No, sweetheart, I just needed to hear your voice. I'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. As I drove home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The house that had felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a prison, filled with reminders of the career I'd just lost. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What would I do now? How would I pay my mortgage? Would anyone want to hire a 48-year-old woman in a job market that seemed to value youth above all else? I got up and went to my computer, opening job search websites with the grim determination of someone facing a terminal diagnosis. The results were depressing. Position after position listed requirements that seemed designed to exclude people like me, seeking dynamic, energetic professionals. Looking for digital natives. Must be comfortable with rapid change and emerging technologies. The subtext was clear. Old people need not apply. As I scrolled through the listings, a pattern began to emerge. This wasn't just about me. Company after company was looking for fresh talent. Innovative thinkers, agile professionals. The language was coded, but the message was obvious. Experience was no longer valued. It was a liability. I thought about my former colleagues, particularly the ones who'd vanished over the past year. Angela from accounting, who'd decided to pursue other opportunities at 58. Mark from operations, who'd chosen early retirement at 62. Deborah from internal communications, who'd left to spend more time with family at 55. None of them had chosen anything. They'd all been pushed out, just like me, victims of a systematic purge designed to replace expensive experience with cheap enthusiasm. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't random. This wasn't about performance or capability. This was about age, pure and simple. Everest Consulting Group was engaged in a deliberate campaign to eliminate older workers. And they were doing it with the kind of surgical precision that would make a mob boss proud. I needed to know more. I needed to understand exactly what was happening and why. But first, I needed coffee. The next morning, I met Angela at our old haunt, a small cafe 3 blocks from the Everest building. She looked older than when I'd last seen her, worn down by months of unemployment and the soul-crushing process of job hunting in your 50s. "I wondered when you'd call," she said, stirring her latte with mechanical precision. "I heard through the grapevine that you got the axe." "Yesterday afternoon," I confirmed. "Lucas Doyle and his fresh perspective." Angela snorted. "That kid couldn't balance a checkbook, let alone understand the complexity of what we do." "Did." "Tell me about the others," I said. "Mark, Deborah, the rest of them, what really happened?" Angela leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's been systematic, Helen. They've been targeting anyone over 50, finding reasons to eliminate us. Performance reviews that suddenly go south. Restructuring that just happens to affect senior staff. Early retirement offers that aren't really offers. But why? We're the ones with the experience, the institutional knowledge. Because we're expensive," Angela said bitterly. "My salary could pay for 2 fresh graduates. Your salary could probably pay for 3. It's simple math." "And they're getting away with it?" "Completely. They're smart about it, never explicitly mention age, always frame it in terms of strategic direction or cultural fit. The lawyers have made sure there's no smoking gun, no evidence of discrimination." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. They think they're so clever. They are clever, Angela admitted, but they're also arrogant. They think they can erase decades of experience and replace it with YouTube tutorials and startup mentality. They're about to find out how wrong they are. After my coffee with Angela, I drove around the city aimlessly, processing what I'd learned. The systematic nature of the purge was staggering. It wasn't just about cutting costs, it was about fundamentally changing the culture of the company, eliminating the voices of experience that might question the new direction. I found myself at the grocery store, mindlessly pushing a cart through the aisles, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Helen? Helen Parker. I turned to find Tammy from HR, looking uncomfortable in her weekend clothes. She seemed smaller outside the corporate environment, less authoritative. "Oh, hi Tammy," I said, forcing politeness into my voice. "I just wanted to say," she began, glancing around nervously, "that I'm really sorry about yesterday. I know this is hard." It's your job," I replied neutrally. "Still," she said, moving closer and lowering her voice. "Between you and me, I think the whole thing is handled badly. But orders come from above, you know." I nodded, sensing an opportunity. It must be difficult, dealing with all these transitions. "You have no idea," Tammy said, her professional mask slipping. "The list just keeps growing. They want a complete overhaul of the senior staff by end of quarter. Clean slate, they call it." "Clean slate," I repeated, filing the phrase away. "I probably shouldn't be saying this," Tammy continued. "But I think they're making a mistake. You can't just throw away years of experience and expect everything to run smoothly." "No," I agreed. "You can't." After she hurried away, I stood in the cereal aisle, surrounded by colorful boxes and promotional displays, feeling like I'd just been handed a key piece of evidence. They weren't just eliminating individual employees, they were systematically dismantling the entire institutional memory of the company. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I created a LinkedIn post. After 26 years of dedicated service, I was told I was too old to adapt to the changing business landscape. Apparently, building lasting client relationships, navigating complex business challenges, and mentoring younger colleagues doesn't qualify as fresh thinking in today's corporate environment. I stared at the draft for an hour, my finger hovering over the post button. Once I hit it, there would be no going back. This would be my declaration of war. I hit post. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, I had dozens of likes and comments from people sharing similar experiences. Within 6 hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. My inbox flooded with messages from former colleagues, industry contacts, and complete strangers who'd lived through similar experiences. The comments section became a virtual support group for the professionally discarded. People shared their own stories of age discrimination, sudden layoffs, and the crushing difficulty of finding new employment after 50. The thread grew longer and longer, becoming a testament to the systematic way American corporations were disposing of experienced workers. Then the media started calling. The first interview was with a local business journalist who was working on a story about ageism in the workplace. Then a podcast host reached out, wanting to discuss the hidden epidemic of age discrimination in corporate America. A producer from a morning show called about a segment on workers' rights. Each interview felt like therapy. I found myself articulating thoughts and feelings I'd been suppressing for months. The anger, the betrayal, the sense of being discarded like a piece of outdated equipment, but also the determination to fight back, to make sure my story mattered. Meanwhile, the post continued to gain traction. "Too Old to Lead" started trending on Twitter. Reddit picked up the story. Business publications began reaching out for comment from Everest Consulting Group. The company's response was predictably corporate. A carefully worded statement about respecting all employees regardless of age and commitment to diversity and inclusion. They mentioned their difficult but necessary business decisions and emphasized their bright future with fresh talent. But the damage was done. The internet had latched onto the story, and Everest was suddenly in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Former employees began coming forward with their own stories. Internal documents started leaking. The carefully constructed narrative of strategic restructuring began to crumble. I watched it all unfold from my home office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and amazement. I'd lit a small fire, and it was spreading far beyond what I'd ever imagined. That's when the first job offer came. It was from a former client, someone I'd worked with for years before his company moved their business to a competitor. He'd seen my LinkedIn post and wanted to know if I'd be interested in some consulting work. "Helen, I always appreciated your straight talk and practical approach," he said over the phone. "We're having some issues with our current consulting firm. They're all flash and no substance. Would you be interested in helping us sort it out?" It was a small project, just a few weeks of work, but it felt like a lifeline. I said yes immediately. The consulting work was exactly what I needed. It reminded me that my skills were still valuable, that experience still mattered to some people. The client was thrilled with my work, and word began to spread through his network. More opportunities followed. A small manufacturing company needed help with a client retention strategy. A nonprofit wanted someone to reorganize their donor relations program. A tech startup, ironically, needed an experienced hand to help them build lasting business relationships. Each project reinforced my confidence and reminded me why I'd been good at my job in the first place. I wasn't just experienced, I was skilled. I understood things that couldn't be learned from books or online courses. I had wisdom that came from years of making mistakes and learning from them. But the real breakthrough came when Jennifer Walsh called. Jennifer was the CEO of Catalyst Partners, Everest Consulting Group's biggest competitor. I'd met her at industry events over the years, and we'd always had a cordial professional relationship. Her call, however, was anything but cordial. "Helen, I've been following your story in the media," she said, her voice crisp and direct. "I'm wondering if you'd be interested in having a conversation about a consulting opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that involves helping me understand how my biggest competitor just shot themselves in the foot," she said. "I'm thinking there might be some talented people looking for new opportunities, and I want to make sure we're positioned to capitalize on Everest's strategic mistakes." The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Catalyst's downtown offices. As I prepared for it, I realized this was more than just a job interview. This was an opportunity to turn my termination into something bigger, to transform my personal setback into a strategic advantage. Catalyst Partners operated out of a sleek glass tower that screamed success and competence. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with fresh flowers and abstract art that probably cost more than my annual salary. It was everything Everest pretended to be, but never quite achieved. Jennifer's office was on the 40th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. She was exactly as I remembered, tall, confident, with silver hair that she wore like a crown and a handshake that could crush coal into diamonds. "Helen, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her desk. "I have to say, I've been watching the fallout from your situation with great interest." "I'm sure you have," I replied, settling into the chair. "Let me be direct," Jennifer continued. "Everest is imploding. Their client retention is down 15% in the last quarter. Their employee satisfaction scores are at historic lows, and they're bleeding talent faster than they can replace it. From where I sit, it looks like a company that's forgotten what business they're actually in." "And what business is that?" "Relationships," she said simply. "Consulting isn't about fancy presentations or trendy methodologies. It's about building trust with clients, understanding their needs, and delivering results they can count on. You can't do that with a workforce that changes every 6 months." I leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I want you to help me recruit the talent that Everest is so eager to discard. I want you to help me understand their client relationships, their operational weaknesses, their strategic blind spots. And I want you to help me position Catalyst as the natural alternative for companies who are tired of working with children." The proposal was audacious. Jennifer wasn't just offering me a job, She was offering me a chance to weaponize my experience against the company that had discarded me. It was corporate warfare, and I was being invited to serve as a strategic consultant. What would my role be? Senior consultant, client relations strategy, she said. You'd work directly with me on business development, help us understand market opportunities, and assist with integrating new talent. The compensation would be substantial. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. The number made my breath catch. It was more than double what I'd been making at Everest. I need to think about this, I said, though my mind was already racing with possibilities. Of course, Jennifer replied. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait. I left the meeting feeling energized in a way I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since my termination, I felt like I had real power, real options. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was a player. That night, I called Angela and told her about the meeting. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. Do it, she said. Take them down. It's not about taking them down, I protested. It's about building something better. Same thing, Angela replied. When you build something better, you automatically take down what's inferior. It's basic economics. Over the next few days, I researched Catalyst Partners thoroughly. Their client list was impressive, their reputation solid, their financial performance strong. Unlike Everest, they seemed to value experience and stability. Their leadership team was diverse in age and background, with several senior executives who'd clearly been promoted based on performance rather than just potential. Most importantly, they seemed to understand what Everest had forgotten: that business is ultimately about relationships. And relationships take time to build and maintain. You can't outsource institutional knowledge or replace decades of experience with enthusiasm and good intentions. I called Jennifer and accepted the offer. My first day at Catalyst felt like coming home. The office environment was professional but warm, with actual humans making actual decisions based on actual expertise. People seemed to enjoy their work, and there was a sense of purpose that had been missing from Everest's sterile corporate culture. Jennifer introduced me to the team as a strategic acquisition, someone who would help them capitalize on market opportunities. The subtext was clear to everyone. I was there to help them take advantage of Everest's self-inflicted wounds. My first project was a comprehensive analysis of Everest's client base. Using my insider knowledge and industry contacts, I identified which relationships were most vulnerable, which clients were most likely to be dissatisfied with the recent changes, and which accounts might be open to switching providers. The results were striking. Nearly 40% of Everest's major clients had expressed some level of dissatisfaction with the service changes. Many were frustrated with the lack of continuity, the absence of senior-level attention, and the sense that they were being managed by people who didn't understand their business. This is better than I hoped, Jennifer said as we reviewed the analysis. They've basically gift-wrapped their client base for us. It's not just about the clients, I explained. It's about the talent they're losing. Some of the best people in the industry are being forced out, and they're angry. If we can provide them with opportunities, we can build a team that's both experienced and motivated. Motivated by what? Revenge, I said simply. Nothing motivates people like the chance to prove their former employer wrong. Jennifer smiled. I like the way you think. The recruitment campaign was surgical in its precision. We identified the most valuable employees who'd been pushed out by Everest's restructuring and approached them with carefully crafted offers. Not just jobs, but opportunities to rebuild their careers with a company that valued their experience. Angela was the first to join, bringing her financial expertise and client relationships. Mark followed, eager to apply his operational knowledge in an environment that appreciated efficiency over flashiness. Deborah came aboard to handle communications, bringing a network of media contacts and a deep understanding of corporate messaging. Each new hire brought not just skills, but intelligence about Everest's operations, client relationships, and strategic vulnerabilities. It was like having a team of defectors from a rival army, each one carrying valuable intelligence about enemy positions and weaknesses. The impact was immediate and devastating. Within 6 weeks, Catalyst had poached 3 major clients from Everest. Within 2 months, we'd hired 8 of their former senior employees. Within 3 months, Everest was bleeding talent and accounts at an unprecedented rate. The industry trade publications began covering the story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of age discrimination. When Experience Fights Back read one headline, The Cost of Discarding Talent read another. Everest found themselves cast as the villain in their own corporate drama. But the real satisfaction came from watching the individual consequences unfold. Lucas Doyle, the architect of the Fresh Perspective strategy, was the first to fall. As client complaints mounted and employee turnover accelerated, he found himself increasingly isolated. His innovative ideas about social media engagement and disruptive methodologies proved worthless when clients started demanding actual results. I learned about his termination through the professional grapevine. He'd been let go to pursue other opportunities, the same euphemism they'd used for all of us. The irony was delicious. The man who'd eliminated experienced workers for being too old was now looking for work in a market that suddenly valued stability over novelty. His LinkedIn profile appeared in my feed a few weeks later, featuring the dreaded Open to Work banner. The same man who'd told me I wasn't fresh enough for the modern business world was now desperately seeking employment, his resume highlighting his extensive experience and proven track record. I didn't gloat. I didn't comment on his posts or reach out to offer false sympathy. I simply observed, with the detached satisfaction of someone watching natural consequences unfold. Other members of Everest's leadership team began falling like dominoes. The VP of Operations, who'd signed off on the age discrimination strategy, was restructured out of his position. The Chief Marketing Officer, who'd championed the youthful energy rebrand, was eliminated in a cost-cutting measure. The head of human resources, poor Tammy, was reassigned to a lesser role after the company faced several age discrimination lawsuits. Meanwhile, Catalyst Partners was thriving. Our client base expanded rapidly as word spread about our experienced, stable team. Our employee satisfaction scores were through the roof. Our financial performance exceeded all projections. I found myself in the unusual position of being busier and more successful than I'd ever been. Clients sought me out specifically, knowing that I brought not just expertise but institutional knowledge that couldn't be replicated. I was consulting on strategic initiatives, mentoring junior staff, and helping to shape the direction of the company. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. I was contributing to something meaningful, working with people who valued my input, and building relationships that would last for years. It was everything I'd lost at Everest, but better. 6 months after my termination, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a headhunter representing Everest Consulting Group. Ms. Parker, I'm calling because my client is looking for someone with your background and experience. The recruiter said, they're specifically seeking someone who understands client relations and has a proven track record with long-term relationship management. I almost laughed. And who is your client? Everest Consulting Group. They're rebuilding their client relations department and looking for senior-level talent. The audacity was breathtaking. The same company that had eliminated me for being too old was now desperately seeking someone exactly like me. They wanted experience, stability, and institutional knowledge, all the things they'd discarded in their rush to embrace fresh thinking. I'm flattered, I said, but I'm very happy in my current position. They're prepared to offer a very competitive package, the recruiter pressed, significantly more than market rate. I'm sure they are, I replied, but some things aren't for sale. After I hung up, I sat in my office at Catalyst, looking out at the city skyline. The view was different from my old office, but the satisfaction was infinitely greater. I'd been thrown away like obsolete equipment, but I'd rebuilt myself into something stronger and more valuable. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Client meeting moved to 2 p.m. The Henderson Group wants to discuss expanding their contract. I smiled and gathered my files. The Henderson Group had been an Everest client for 12 years before switching to Catalyst. They'd made the change specifically because they wanted to work with experienced professionals who understood their business. As I walked to the conference room, I passed the wall of awards and recognition that Catalyst had earned over the years. Unlike Everest's sterile corporate displays, these felt genuine, earned through actual performance rather than marketing campaigns. The meeting went well. The Henderson Group was thrilled with our work and wanted to expand their engagement. They praised our team's experience, our understanding of their industry, and our ability to deliver results without constant hand-holding. "This is exactly what we were missing with our previous firm," the client said. "You understand our business because you've been in business long enough to understand how it really works." After the meeting, I returned to my office and opened my laptop. My email was full of the usual consulting business, client updates, project proposals, industry newsletters. But one message stood out. It was from Madison Torres, my replacement at Everest. The subject line read, "Advice?" I opened it with curiosity. "Dear Ms. Parker," it began, "I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out because I'm struggling in my current role, and I remembered how helpful you were during our brief interaction. The clients are unhappy, the turnover is constant, and I feel like I'm drowning. Would you be willing to give me some advice? I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't know who else to ask." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. The young woman who'd replaced me was discovering that experience couldn't be replaced with enthusiasm. But another part felt genuinely sorry for her. She'd been set up to fail by a company that valued youth over competence. I wrote back, "Madison, I appreciate you reaching out. The situation you're describing isn't your fault. It's a systemic problem with how the company approaches client relationships. My advice is to focus on listening to your clients, building genuine relationships, and learning from the mistakes rather than trying to avoid them. And consider whether you're working for a company that sets its employees up for success or failure." I hit send and went back to my work. There was a proposal to finish, a client presentation to prepare, and a team meeting to attend. I had a full life again, one built on my own terms. That evening, as I drove home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a discarded employee, told I was too old to contribute to the modern business world. Now I was a senior consultant at a thriving firm, earning more money than I'd ever made, working with clients who valued my experience, and contributing to a company that appreciated what I brought to the table. The house that had felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary again. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Saw the article about your new company in the business journal. So proud of you, Mom." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks, sweetheart. It's been quite a journey." As I sat there, I thought about the lessons I'd learned. That experience matters. That wisdom can't be downloaded or learned from a YouTube video. That relationships built over years are worth more than trendy strategies and social media campaigns. I thought about Lucas Doyle, probably at home right now, scrolling through job listings and wondering how his career had gone off track so quickly. I thought about the executives at Everest, dealing with angry clients and a demoralized workforce. I thought about the company itself, struggling to rebuild the institutional knowledge they'd so cavalierly discarded. But mostly, I thought about the future, about the clients I'd serve, the projects I'd complete, the relationships I'd build, about the younger colleagues I'd mentor, teaching them that experience and innovation weren't mutually exclusive, about the company I'd help grow, proving that success came from combining fresh ideas with seasoned wisdom. I raised my wine glass to the setting sun, a silent toast to survival, to resilience, to the power of refusing to be discarded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new clients to serve. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. The woman they'd said was too old to lead was now leading on her own terms. And that, I thought as I finished my wine and headed inside, was the best revenge of all. My laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, the screen showing my calendar for the next week. 3 client meetings, 2 strategy sessions, and a presentation to the board about our Q3 performance. I was busier than I'd been in years, and every day brought new evidence that experience wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. The next morning brought news that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Jennifer called me into her office with barely contained excitement. "Helen, I just got off the phone with David Chen at Meridian Industries," she said, referring to one of the largest consulting contracts in the city. "They're terminating their relationship with Everest effective immediately. They want to meet with us about taking over the account." Meridian Industries. I knew that account intimately. I'd helped win it for Everest 8 years ago, had managed the relationship through 2 CEO changes and a major acquisition. It was worth nearly $2 million annually, and losing it would be a devastating blow to Everest's already declining revenue. "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Same story we've been hearing everywhere. The new team at Everest doesn't understand their business, keeps proposing solutions that don't fit their culture, and treats them like they're just another generic client. David specifically asked if you were available to lead the transition." The irony was perfect. The relationship I'd spent years building was now following me to my new company, along with the revenue and prestige it represented. Everest hadn't just lost an employee when they terminated me. They'd lost the institutional knowledge that made their client relationships possible. "When's the meeting?" I asked. "Thursday at 10. David wants to bring his entire executive team. This could be our biggest win yet." I spent the next 2 days preparing a presentation that would demonstrate exactly what Everest had lost when they'd chosen youth over experience. Not just my individual contributions, but the entire approach to client service that they'd abandoned in their rush to modernize. The meeting was held in Meridian's boardroom, a space I'd visited dozens of times over the years. David Chen greeted me like an old friend, which in many ways, he was. We'd worked together through countless challenges, had built the kind of professional relationship that couldn't be replicated with fresh graduates and social media strategies. "Helen, it's good to see you again," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "I have to say, we were shocked when we heard about your situation at Everest. Shocked and disappointed." "These things happen," I replied diplomatically. "But I'm excited about the opportunity to work with you again in a new capacity." The presentation went flawlessly. I demonstrated not just our capabilities, but our understanding of Meridian's specific needs, their corporate culture, their strategic objectives. I spoke their language because I'd learned it over years of collaboration, not from a briefing document or a PowerPoint deck. The questions from their team were detailed and sophisticated, exactly the kind of inquiries that would have stumped a less experienced consultant. But I'd faced these challenges before, had developed solutions through trial and error, had earned their trust through consistent performance. "This is exactly what we've been missing," David said after I'd finished. "We need partners who understand our business, not consultants who treat us like a case study." The contract was signed within a week, $2 million in annual revenue, plus additional project work that could easily double that amount. It was the largest client acquisition in Catalyst's history, and it sent shockwaves through the industry. The business press covered the story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing demographics over performance. "Experience strikes back," read one headline. "The $1 million mistake," read another. Industry analysts began questioning whether other companies were making similar errors, discarding valuable talent in favor of cheaper alternatives. But the real story was playing out in the offices of Everest Consulting Group, where panic was setting in. The loss of the Meridian account, combined with the departure of other major clients, had created a crisis that couldn't be ignored. Stock prices were declining, employee morale was at historic lows, and the board was asking difficult questions about the company's strategic direction. I learned about the internal chaos through my network of former colleagues who were still trapped inside the company. The atmosphere was toxic, with blame being assigned and scapegoats being identified. The same executives who championed the fresh perspective strategy were now desperately trying to distance themselves from its consequences. Lucas Doyle, still unemployed despite months of searching, had become a particularly bitter symbol of the failed strategy. Industry contacts told me he was struggling to find work, his reputation tainted by his association with Everest's decline. The man who'd eliminated experienced workers for being outdated was now discovering that his own ideas were the ones that had become obsolete. Meanwhile, Catalyst continued to thrive. Our success with the Meridian account had attracted attention from other major clients, and our pipeline was fuller than it had ever been. Companies were actively seeking out firms that could provide stability and experience, qualities that had become increasingly rare in the consulting industry. The growth meant new opportunities for everyone on our team. Angela had been promoted to Director of Financial Strategy, with a salary that exceeded what she'd made at Everest. Mark was leading a new operational efficiency division, applying his decades of experience to help clients streamline their processes. Deborah had become our Chief Communications Officer, using her industry knowledge to build Catalyst's brand and reputation. We weren't just surviving, we were proving that experience was not just valuable, but essential. Every success story reinforced the lesson that institutional knowledge, professional relationships, and hard-earned wisdom couldn't be replaced with enthusiasm and good intentions. The vindication was sweet, but it was also bittersweet. I thought about all the other experienced professionals who'd been discarded by companies that valued youth over competence. How many valuable careers had been ended prematurely? How many clients had been poorly served by inexperienced consultants? How many companies had damaged themselves by eliminating their institutional memory? These questions became more pressing when I received another unexpected call. This time, it was from a law firm representing a group of former Everest employees who were considering a class action lawsuit for age discrimination. Ms. Parker, we've been following your story and the stories of other former Everest employees. The attorney said, "We believe there's a strong case for systematic age discrimination, and we'd like to discuss the possibility of you serving as a lead plaintiff." The idea was tempting. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern of terminations, the coded language in job postings, the systematic replacement of experienced workers with younger alternatives. A successful lawsuit would not only provide financial compensation, but would also serve as a warning to other companies engaged in similar practices. But after discussing it with Jennifer and my family, I decided against it. I was thriving in my new role, building something positive rather than fighting old battles. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't legal action. It was success. "I appreciate the offer," I told the attorney, "but I'm focused on moving forward, not looking backward." The lawsuit proceeded without me, eventually resulting in a significant settlement and changes to Everest's employment practices. But by then, the damage was done. The company's reputation was permanently tainted, its client base decimated, its employee morale destroyed. The final act of this corporate drama came almost exactly 1 year after my termination. I was in my office, reviewing proposals for a new client presentation, when Jennifer knocked on my door. "Helen, you need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "Everest just announced they're being acquired by Blackstone Partners." I looked at the news article on her screen. The acquisition was being described as a rescue operation for a company that had lost its way. The purchase price was a fraction of what Everest had been worth just 2 years earlier. The press release mentioned plans for significant restructuring and renewed focus on experienced talent. "They're essentially admitting that their strategy was wrong," Jennifer continued. "Too little, too late." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in being proven right, but also sadness for the colleagues who'd remained at the company, watching their workplace dissolve around them. The acquisition would likely mean more layoffs, more disruption, more careers derailed by poor leadership decisions. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. As I sat at the bar, enjoying a glass of wine and reflecting on the year's events, I noticed a familiar figure at a table across the room. It was Lucas Doyle, dining alone and looking considerably older than when I'd last seen him. His confident demeanor was gone, replaced by the defeated posture of someone who'd learned that the business world was less forgiving than he'd imagined. Our eyes met briefly. and I saw recognition flicker across his face. For a moment, I considered going over to say hello, perhaps even offering some professional advice. But then I remembered his dismissive attitude during our last meeting, his certainty that experience was obsolete, his casual cruelty in discarding decades of dedicated service. Instead, I raised my wine glass in a subtle toast, not to his failure, but to the lesson he'd learned. Then I turned back to my own thoughts, my own future, my own hard-earned success. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my calendar packed with meetings. A new client wanted to discuss a major engagement. A professional association had asked me to speak at their annual conference. A business school had invited me to teach a masterclass on client relationship management. I was no longer just a consultant. I was becoming a thought leader, someone whose experience and insights were valued by the industry. The woman who'd been told she was too old to adapt was now being asked to share her wisdom with the next generation of professionals. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same qualities that had made me obsolete at Everest, my experience, my institutional knowledge, my understanding of business relationships, were now the foundation of my professional renaissance. I hadn't needed to become younger or more dynamic. I'd simply needed to find an environment that valued what I brought to the table. As I prepared for my first meeting of the day, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the humiliation of termination to the satisfaction of success, from the fear of obsolescence to the confidence of expertise. It had been a difficult year, but also a transformative one. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a potential client, a CEO who'd heard about my work with Meridian Industries and wanted to discuss a similar engagement. As I took notes on his needs and challenges, I realized that this was exactly where I belonged, not as a discarded employee, but as a valued professional whose experience was an asset, not a liability. The conversation continued for 30 minutes, covering everything from strategic planning to operational efficiency. The client was impressed with my insights and wanted to schedule a face-to-face meeting. Another opportunity, another chance to prove that experience matters. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked out at the city skyline. The view was different from my old office, but the satisfaction was infinitely greater. I'd been thrown away like obsolete equipment, but I'd rebuilt myself into something stronger and more valuable. My computer chimed with a new email. It was from Madison Torres, my replacement at Everest. The subject line read, "Thank you." I opened it with curiosity. "Dear Ms. Parker," it began. "I wanted to follow up on our previous correspondence and thank you for your advice. I've decided to leave Everest and pursue opportunities where I can work with experienced professionals who can teach me the business properly. Your guidance helped me realize that I was being set up to fail, and I deserve better than that. I hope someday I can have the kind of career longevity and expertise that you've achieved." I smiled and typed back, "Madison, I'm glad I could help. Remember that experience is something you earn, not something you're given. Find mentors who can guide you. And don't be afraid to ask questions. The best professionals are those who never stop learning." I hit send and returned to my work. There was a proposal to finish, a client presentation to prepare, and a team meeting to attend. I had a full life again, one built on my own terms. That afternoon, as I walked to my car in the parking garage, I passed a newsstand displaying the latest issue of a business magazine. The cover story was titled, "The Wisdom Wars: Why Experience Beats Youth in Today's Business World." The subtitle read, "How Companies That Discarded Older Workers Are Paying the Price." I bought a copy and read the article over coffee. It featured interviews with executives who'd learned the hard way that institutional knowledge couldn't be replaced with enthusiasm. Companies that had eliminated experienced workers were struggling with client relationships, operational efficiency, and strategic planning. The article concluded that the most successful organizations were those that valued experience alongside innovation. The piece mentioned my story as an example of how discarded talent was finding new opportunities with competitors. It quoted industry analysts who predicted that age discrimination lawsuits would become more common as companies faced the consequences of their short-sighted policies. But the real validation came from the clients I served every day. They didn't care about my age or my generational perspective. They cared about results, about solutions, about the kind of professional relationship that could only be built through years of experience. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the year's events. I'd been told I was too old to lead, too set in my ways to adapt, too expensive to justify. But I'd proven that experience was not just valuable, it was irreplaceable. The companies that had discarded experienced workers were discovering that wisdom couldn't be downloaded, that relationships took time to build, that institutional knowledge was a strategic asset. They were learning these lessons the hard way, through lost clients, failed projects, and damaged reputations. Meanwhile, I was thriving in an environment that valued what I brought to the table. My age wasn't a liability, it was an asset. My experience wasn't outdated, it was essential. My knowledge wasn't obsolete, it was the foundation of my professional success. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house that had felt like a prison just 1 year earlier. Now it felt like a sanctuary again, a place where I could rest and recharge before facing the challenges of another day. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Great job on the Henderson Group presentation today. They want to expand the contract again. You're officially our top revenue generator." I smiled and typed back, "Happy to contribute. See you tomorrow." As I walked to my front door, I thought about the future, about the clients I'd serve, the projects I'd complete, the relationships I'd build, about the younger colleagues I'd mentor, teaching them that experience and innovation weren't mutually exclusive, about the company I'd help grow, proving that success came from combining fresh ideas with seasoned wisdom. The porch light illuminated my key as I unlocked the door. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the accumulated comforts of a life well lived. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my favorite chair, laptop open, reviewing tomorrow's schedule, 3 client meetings, 2 strategy sessions, and a conference call with a potential new account. I was busier than I'd been in years, and every day brought new evidence that experience wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. The woman they'd said was too old to lead was now leading on her own terms. The employee they'd discarded as obsolete was now the most sought-after consultant in her field. The professional they'd deemed too expensive was now earning more than she'd ever imagined possible. I didn't need daydreams of further vindication or fantasies of additional revenge. The present was sweet enough. Success, I had learned, was the best response to rejection. Excellence was the finest answer to discrimination. And wisdom, hard-earned and battle-tested, was the most valuable currency in any market. I closed my laptop and finished my wine, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that experience matters. The future was bright, and it belonged to those who'd earned the right to claim it. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And that, I thought as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, was exactly where I belonged.